So, the Renaissance was a period of great change and growth for men, but not so much for women. Perhaps the most interesting thing about the Renaissance was that in a movement that was all about promoting the individual, it doesn't really allow women the opportunity to grow and develop their own virtue. The humanists described the perfect woman as one that doesn't display any knowledge or intelligence. And I will warn you, this is going to get kind of sexist by modern terms, but you have to understand this is how they saw the world during the Renaissance. So it was considered to be improper for a woman to engage in discussions of politics, philosophy, or literature while in the company of men. Women were expected to not play a role in governing the state or to hold any public office. It was believed that women should be that link to the past, okay, and the Christian values of modesty and humility. Even the word virtue is a male word. I mean, viri, V I R, literally means man. And the only way women were really encouraged to show any kind of individuality was by her support and the obedience to her husband. Women were expected to marry by the age of 18, whereas men, it was 27. The reason for that difference is young men were expected to go out, to learn as much about themselves, to experience as much as they could, gain wisdom, and develop their virtues. Whereas women were expected to start their family. And 18 was considered an old age. A lot of women started getting married as soon as puberty set in. This was such an important aspect of Renaissance culture that there were actually guidebooks that would lay out how women should behave, how to find a great bride, what to expect within marriage. Perhaps one of the most popular of these books was called The Father of the Family by a man by the name of Torquato Tasso, and he offers advice to young men looking for a bride. And I'm going to quote him here. I say that a husband should try to find a young wife rather than an old one. Not only are young women more fit for bearing children, but they are also better at receiving and adopting the habits that a husband wants to impart on them. If a man takes a wife under the conditions that I have just described, it will be much easier for him to exercise the superiority that nature has granted men. And if he cannot make his natural superiority felt, he'll sometimes find his wife disobedient, that in the place of a companion he expected to help lighten his burden that our humanity brings with it, he will confront a perpetual enemy who is as contrary to him as unbridled desire to reason. So this idea of how to be a good wife started, for girls as early as their education in school. To make sure that these women wouldn't be a burden to their husbands, young girls were taught 4 rules on being a proper wife. Okay, so here you go. These are the 4 rules to be a proper Renaissance wife. First of all, always be good to your husband's friends and family. 2, do not do anything important without seeking your husband's advice. 3, be attractive, fresh, clean, modest in appearance, and chaste in behavior. And 4, don't go out too often. The outside world is the man's domain, whereas the woman's is inside the house. So this idea of keeping women from experiencing the world, from being active participants in the world, allowed the Renaissance to be very much so male-dominated. That being said, some women did manage to find their own way. They did manage to leave their mark on the Renaissance, and we did have women who were artists, women who were writers, women who played an active role within society. But for the most part, the average woman, whether you are from the upper class, the middle class, or the working class, were very much so expected to keep to their home, raise their children, and take care of their husbands. So education wasn't the only way in which they tried to ensure that women were compliant with the ideals being set out during the Renaissance. If a woman wasn't compliant, they very simply accused them of being a witch. The hunting of witches became extremely popular during the late Middle Ages into the Renaissance, and you can kind of start to understand why. This is a period that is highly religious. The Catholic Church has a large amount of control over not just religion, but politics. And there was a lot of really bad things going on that they couldn't seem to explain. You've got outbreaks of plague, you've got famine, war, bad weather that were causing, crops not to grow. And people were looking for a reason for all of this hardship. Now, they couldn't blame God because God would never allow such things to happen. So, if it wasn't God, it had to be Satan and his agents. Now, the movement to search out witches really kind of picked up under the papacy of Pope Innocent VIII. Innocent sent people out there to find out, to root out this evil that lived amongst them. And people did. In 1486, two Germans, Heinrich Kramer and Johann Sprenger, wrote a book called De Malus Maleficarum, translates to Hammer Against Witches. And this book became an important guidebook on how to identify, torture, and kill witches. These two guys actually traveled throughout Europe making their living in searching out witches to save communities from. So, let's see if we can find out if any of you or anyone you know is a witch based on the guidebook written by Kramer and Sprenger. So here you go. Some of the telltale signs of a witch include, first off, women with warts, extra body parts such as extra toes, fingers, or nipples. 2, women who speak too much and interfere in the world of men. 3, red-haired women are most likely to be witches, but it can also be with those of you who have brown or blonde hair. 4, women who spend a lot of time in the woods, alone or in the company of other women. 5, women who enjoy sexual activity. 6, women who give the evil eye or mutter under their breath. I'm sure some of you have done both of those. 7, women who cannot sink in water. 8, women who talk to animals or plants. So if you like to talk to your dog or your cat, you would be accused of being a witch. And finally, women who know a lot about healing using potions and plants. So although we can't see it, some of you might be sitting there putting your hand up being like, I would be accused of being a witch. So women who were accused of witchcraft were brought to trial, usually by their community. They usually had experts who would do various tests and put them through various trials. Not to mention that sometimes too these women would be tortured. Women were brought to trial within their communities. Usually it would be overseen by a member of the church or a city official who would listen to the testimony, and they would end up rendering their verdict. And in most of these cases, it did mean death. This was a way in which they could really kind of keep control over what they believed to be, the mounting evil within their society. Keep in mind, every ill in society was kind of seen as the fault of witches. Your cow doesn't give milk, it's the fault of a witch. Your crops don't grow, it's the fault of a witch. Even the death of a child, it was because, a pregnant woman could say that old woman gave me the evil eye. This accusation of witchcraft was used by a lot of people to further their own political, social, or business dealings. And a lot of innocent women were accused of witchcraft. These witch hunts and trials would continue to ensure that women didn't progress socially, artistically, or politically during the Middle Ages. Women were afraid to speak out because they didn't want to be accused of witchcraft. And more importantly, they didn't want to find themselves strapped to a stake and burnt alive in front of their family, their friends, and their community. So in fact, the accusations of witchcraft and these trials really served to ensure that male dominance would continue in Renaissance Europe and going forward. Although the witch trials would come to an end as science started to progress and become an accepted ideal within Europe, it would find its way to the New World, and perhaps some of the most famous trials, that which occurred in Salem, Massachusetts. The Renaissance would not just be artistic light and the creation of some of the greatest works of art that humanity would ever see. There were other aspects going on at play in the Renaissance too, which really kind of did create some of the darker aspects of the Renaissance. In the next lesson, you're going to be looking at the effects of the Black Death and how that is going to change Europe and take Europe, basically hundreds of years to bounce back from. But we're going to stop there. So with that, today's class is history.